Ralph Russo, theathletic.com. My man, how we doing? Paul Catalina, David Smoke with you. Appreciate your time. I know we're going to get into the article that you did in The Athletic over the weekend. I think it was over the weekend. But let me get your reaction first to the tournament. There's a little drama, big brands. This is just who we are now in college athletics, right, Ralph?
Yeah, listen, there is, yes. Well, first of all, there's always drama in college athletics. It wouldn't be college athletics without drama. I think everybody always has to sort of like portray themselves as being victimized. And this is the greatest atrocity of all time because my 19-13 team didn't get into the NCAA tournament, which is pretty laughable. Mm-hmm. And does North Carolina get a bump because there was a big brand? Maybe, or maybe people just thought North Carolina was better. I have a hard time getting worked up over defending the 38th best team in the country or arguing over who the 37th best team in the country is. But it plays well with the base down in West Virginia. So clearly they have nothing else, no other problems to deal with down there. So that's what we're doing today.
Ralph, Swing and I were talking about this earlier. I think us debating whether North Carolina or West Virginia or Oklahoma or Texas or Xavier should be in this thing is the exact reason that there's enough teams in the tournament. We don't need any more.
So that's probably true, and maybe we can get into that because I just had an article today about where expansion of the tournament stands. I think that is fair because at this point you're kind of looking and going like, I don't know if any of these teams should get in, even the ones that are in, right? I mean, we've now seen make a fairly good case for Oklahoma because of its non-conference wins, but like Texas 6-12, man, like 15 losses overall. Okay, like yeah, like I think that's a very good argument for this thing is big enough. 68 is fine. There aren't a whole bunch of teams out there that we are truly snubbing, right? We use that word a lot. And I think for Florida State in the CFP a couple of years ago, I think that was a good word. I think that word fit. I think for this right here, it's not so much that you got snubbed as much as, hey, man, this one just didn't go your way. But like, frankly, you know, there's a whole bunch of, I can make an argument for or against all y'all.
I think the West Virginia governor realizes the NCAA has not won a legal battle in 20 years, or at least the last 8 or 10. And obviously it's a political stroke. He's trying to get a little bit of feel good out of this. It's like, just let it go. But what is he doing?
Well, so I don't think you're doing much here. I do think you're sort of placating your constituents. And, you know, I've never run for office and I never will. So, maybe I'm underestimating the value of just sort of like throwing some chum to the constituents and making the people who vote for you happy, right? That's an important thing. If you're going to be a politician, you need to make the people who vote for you happy. I understand the NCAA has a hard time winning cases in court, but Florida lawmakers tried to do something like this a couple of years ago with the CFP and it went nowhere. The NCAA is a voluntary organization. The rules of how the tournament are selected are incredibly clear. They don't run into antitrust issues. West Virginia could simply say, West Virginia University, could simply say, we are no longer part of that voluntary organization, right?
Yeah.
They have signed on to be part of the rules. They literally are part of the rule-making process. So it's very different. Places where the NCAA loses tend to be related to student athletes because then you run into all kinds of antitrust issues. Generally speaking, schools have a hard time butting heads with the NCAA because they all signed on for this.
Where do you mentioned you wrote the article on it. Where do they stand with expanding the tournament right now?
I think the best way I can sum this up, guys, is like, I understand fans don't like this. So there is opposition among, the common folks like us. Like, I don't think any of us really feel like there's a great need to expand. And a lot of the blame gets pushed on, Greg Sankey sort of became the face of this, but all the power conferences, right? Brett Yormark comes out last week and says, I think 76. It's definitely the power conferences driving this because they see the opportunity to get more of their teams in. But the thing that's, I think, lost in the sauce here is there isn't any real established opposition to this within college sports. There are folks who can be categorized as like, yeah, if we expand, some of the benefits will trickle down to us. The Atlantic 10, spoke to the Ivy League commissioner, was like, we had a few teams on the bubble on the women's side, and we've had 12 and 13 seeds on the men's side recently that have won games. This could work out in our favor. And I think a lot of folks in college sports think like, yes, it might not be we might not benefit the most, but we will benefit. And then there's a section that is sort of like, we kind of like it the way it is, but if it will shut up the Power Four and keep them happy, and we're not taking a haircut financially on this, yeah, it's fine. We'll add a few more teams. So again, there is not like a strong opposition within college sports to it. So if there is no strong opposition, sorry about that, something just fell in my room.
It's okay.
If there is no strong opposition to it, then it just comes down to the financials. And if there can be enough additional revenue brought into the system to make everybody whole, because nobody's taking a pay cut on expansion. So you have to balance the books to make it work.
So you had a combo article about the transfer portal. Is that correct?
You spent hours selecting your patio sofa. Choosing that grill would have taken weeks. Probably your car needed way more time. For sure, you would have spent months mulling over that pool of yours. Protecting your prized possessions needs no time, though. Just visit coversandall.com, create a custom size per your requirements, pick a fabric and personalize your cover, and leave the rest to us. Premium protection for all that you love.
Couple of things. Yeah, we did. Stuart Mandel, my buddy, handled most of that story. I helped with some of the reporting. Basically, the premise is we have revenue sharing coming, and schools are now signing contracts. Mm-hmm. Schools, not collectives, but schools are trying to sign contracts. Sometimes the collectives are signing them and they're going to be converted to school contracts with schools with their players to handle revenue sharing. And we kind of got a hand on some of these contracts and tried to sort of look through some of the terms. And what you realize is they look a lot like employee contracts, even though we keep telling these athletes that they're not employees. So that makes you think, okay, well, maybe this is a way to stem some of the transfer portal activity. You work in buyouts. Maybe you have multi-year deals, and that might tamp down on the transferring. Maybe. I mean, I think ultimately there's a thought that might work, but I also think that there's some skepticism about how valid these are. And I still think we're in a transition phase in terms of how that will work out.
So the athletes are against being called an employee, right?
I mean, you hear that a lot out of the NCAA. Yeah. And I do think, now I don't think they're lying. I do think a lot of the athletes look at that and say, like, I don't know if this is the best thing for me, whether they're non-revenue athletes or even some in the high revenue sports. I think that there is some, I don't think that's a definitive statement that all athletes don't want that, but I do get the sense that a lot of athletes think that, I don't know, that doesn't look like a great situation for me. I kind of like what I got now.
You and Chris Vanini also wrote about the power grab that's going on a couple weeks ago in college football between the SEC and the Big Ten. One of the politicians and the courts and all that's fine, but you mentioned ESPN. They have to. They're doubling down on their streaming package and all of that. It does seem to would not make a lot of sense to them to alienate 2/3 of the country.
So we've talked about this a lot. I feel like this is a running theme when I come on with you guys about sort of like where college football, the state of college sports are going, and I often land on this idea of how much consolidation is good. Right. It's one thing to say, oh, Oregon State and Washington, we're kicking you to the kiddie table. That's not great. That's not Oregon State and Washington State. That's not cool. But how many more of those do you want to do? Do you want to do the whole Big 12? Do you want to do half of the ACC? And at a certain point, you end up relegating a lot of teams and a lot of fan bases who might not feel invested in your big product, your big product being the college football playoff. And I think that's where I wonder, it's hard because like it's hard to get people at ESPN to sort of to ever talk on the record on this because they never want to feel like they're the tail wagging the dog when it comes to the CFP. The CFP sort of makes the decisions, the conferences make the decisions, and the ESPN's a partner that's supportive and tries to be a good partner. Let's just put it that way. But I from what you hear through the grapevine is a lot of like, I don't know if ESPN likes this idea of automatic bids because it might take away from the regular season. Because as you said, then all of a sudden, like, what is the ACC and the Big 12 product if it's already declared half of what the Big 10 and SEC are? When you own so much of that product, especially with the ACC running through, now again through 2036. So I think there's a bunch of obstacles that could stand in the way of that CFP takeover. And I think ESPN has to be considered at the very least a speed bump, if not a full-on hurdle.
Ralph, we had Dennis Dodd on. He's retiring in the next month. We had him on. He said this about the Big 12 in a complimentary way. 16 teams that nobody wants. He meant that because they're not worried about anybody stealing who they have, although there are some brands that people would probably like. I stopped for a second. I said, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. But in a way, is that a compliment?
So, first of all, Dennis is the best. He is. I kind of look up to Dennis, even though I'm kind of an old guy myself. But I came into this business. He was already well established, and he was a great friend. Showed me the ropes. He is awesome. So I got that out of the way. The reason why the Big 12 works in some ways better than any other conference, and the reason why it survived and the Pac-12 I don't think did, and the ACC is having all kinds of angst, is because I'll try to be a little nicer with my language here. The Big 12 schools tend to be all aligned. They are most similar to one another. They don't really have definitive tiers like you have in the ACC, where Florida State and Clemson are sort of a football tier to themselves in terms of how much they invest and where their football programs land in the larger ecosphere, right? And Duke and Wake Forest are kind of a different tier, and BC and Syracuse have a different goals and priorities than maybe some of those other schools. I think within the Big 12, everybody kind of looks the same, right? Everybody's kind of acting the same. Their stadiums are about the same. Their budgets are around the same. I'm talking broadly here, but they all, very few places, though actually a lot of the new schools belied this. And we would say like the Big 12, a lot of places that don't have direct flights. It's hard to get the direct flights to, right?
Yep.
That's changed a lot now. With the addition of some of these new schools. But I do think that is part of its strength and the reason why it has a certain amount of like stability, because now how long that lasts, maybe some of these schools do start pulling away from one another and do become a little more desirable. Don't ask me to guess which ones, but I think for now, that's one of the reasons why the Big 12 stability works.
With the ACC, what's your prediction of how this goes down in 5 years? Because even in 5 years, there's still a chance that Florida State and Clemson don't have a place to go, but there could be a major deck reshuffling. We have no idea.
Yeah, and that's what I'm going to hit on, guys. It's like the major deck reshuffling. The reason why I can't make a prediction is because I think we would be doing faulty thinking if we just think linearly. In other words, what's going to happen in 2030, 2031 is an extension of what has been already happening. So will we have a super league? Will the Big 10 and SEC decide, maybe we won't have a super league, but maybe the Big 10 and SEC decide that like we are the super league, right? But we're done. We're done adding because this is too unruly otherwise. I just wonder if the reason why I like to just simply say the ACC is going to fall apart. They're all going to scatter. It's not so much where will they go because will other conferences want them? It's where will they go because is the media landscape still the same? There's just so much that plays into this. Is the political landscape still the same? Are the laws still the same that govern college football? I just think assuming that, well, they'll jump to the SEC and the Big Ten, possible, but I think that you're missing a bigger picture is like, we don't know what all this stuff is going to look like in 5 or 6 years. We could have a totally different system and structure to college sports and college football.
Ralph, great stuff. How much or has your job changed from the AP to what you're doing now?
In many ways, not much. I mean, one of the good things about when they hired me at The Athletic is they kind of said, and this might be, I'm going to sound a little immodest here. We like what you do, just do it here. Great. Yeah. I was very fortunate about that they gave me this opportunity. For the most part, I'm doing essentially the same thing. And I love the AP, and I owe my life and my career to the AP for 30 years, but had the opportunity to do it for a different platform, maybe a little more exposure, maybe a little more money. But at this point in my career, when I'm closer to the end to the beginning, it was a nice opportunity, and I couldn't really pass up.
Ralph, appreciate you, buddy. Great. Thanks for coming on many things, from the NCAA tournament, from some of the drama to the college football playoff to the transfer portal, house settlement, Paul's question about looking into the what's the future like?